Hello and welcome to the third Club Angel Plus baking class. Today I was going to dive into gluten-free vegan pie crust, but I've had so much interest and excitement around the cinnamon roll recipe that I've been creating. So I decided to just go straight into that one today, and then I will circle back to the pie crust, I promise. I want to make sure you have that class going into pie season. So today we are working on a cinnamon roll recipe that's honestly been 10 years in the making. 10 years. I've made cinnamon rolls hundreds of times. Paleo, keto, early on just gluten-free, vegan. So this is kind of like a full circle moment here for me. I have worked so long and hard to be able to create something on this level. I am not lying to you when I tell you this is by far the most innovative, incredible recipe I've ever created to date. Like, just trust me on this one. You guys have to make these, and if you make them once, you'll be back to make them over and over and over again, because this is a life-changing recipe that you will make every special occasion. So they're not hard. They're honestly pretty easy. Well, easy is relative for me. They're easy. I consider things like puff pastry, or I don't know, something along those lines to be more challenging. This is not hard. This just requires some special skills that maybe are not intuitive for you. Gluten-free bread baking in particular is different than regular baking in that the dough needs to be a lot more moist and wet in order for you to be able to get a proper rise. So that's the main thing. So a lot of times when you make your bread batter, you're going to, think, oh, this isn't right, I need to add more flour. This doesn't seem quite right, because it's not what you're used to. But I promise you, this is exactly what you're gonna want. So I really want to do the class for this one in particular, so you can see what the texture looks like and really have a strong understanding for what you need to do, what it needs to look like, the process, all the little tips and tricks. Because if you follow those, I promise you, this recipe is foolproof. Okay, first thing we need to talk about, no substitutions, none. Don't do it. I mean, you can do it, but I have no idea what's gonna happen. Getting this recipe just right required trial after trial after trial of messing with the tiniest little details, a little more or less flour, a little more or less sugar, a little more or less fat. Like, I recommend buying exactly the brands that I'm using and sticking with that, and that's it. If you want to experiment, feel free, but if things don't turn out, it's on you. Okay, so first tip, you need to use a baking scale. Absolutely, positively, you have to use a baking scale. In the recipe, I have included the cup measurements just to make things a little easier for you, so that when you're buying ingredients, you have an idea of how much you need. But don't use the cups, use the grams. Gluten-free baking is extremely finicky, and even just the slightest change could throw things off. For example, like the way that I measure a cup of flour changes every single time that I fill a cup of flour, every single time. And that's how it is across the board. And the other thing too is a lot of times measuring cups are not even the same brand to brand to brand. So please don't even think about making this unless you get a baking scale. And honestly, that goes for most of my recipes. That's just the truth. If you want things to turn out like mine, you have to use a scale. It's not hard, it's not scary, these are not expensive. I promise you, just get one. Okay, next thing. I am using my KitchenAid today. And when it comes to gluten-free baking, a lot of you probably already know this, you're not gonna use the dough hook. Never ever. Gluten-free bread is nothing like regular. You always want to use the whisk attachment or the paddle. Today we are using the paddle. If you do not have a stand mixer, you probably could do this no problem with a hand mixer. You're just gonna need to kind of get in there and use your hands towards the end, because it's gonna be kind of a thicker dough, not as thick as like regular flour dough, but it's a little bit thicker. So you're gonna have to put some muscle into it, but it is possible. Let's talk about flour blends next. I tested out several different flour blends. I personally like to do my own custom blends because I understand how the ingredients work, and I like to do a little more or less of different things to get the texture that I want. But I've been working really hard on simplifying my recipes for you guys, because I know a lot of you just prefer to just grab a mix and go and just be done with it. So I've been testing out different flour blends. I started out using Pamela's I think it's Pamela's all-purpose flour. I started out using that when I started creating this recipe, and it was okay. I mean, I could have posted them, you would have liked them, but I knew we could do better. So I went back to what has become my favorite go-to, this King Arthur gluten-free Measure for Measure. Do not use an all-purpose flour. You must use Measure for Measure. This has xanthan gum in it, and we need that. So grab this one. I've noticed if you order it on Amazon, it's way cheaper than anywhere else. It's like $5 per bag, and this is a 3-pound bag, so it's a really great deal. Okay, next, this is the secret magical ingredient to these cinnamon rolls. You can't not use it. They're just not going to turn out the same. This is what makes them taste like they are made with gluten. This is what makes them soft and fluffy and tender. And it also makes it so that they don't get hard as they cool down. They stay really just soft. Even the next day, they're still going to be soft and wonderful. And that is Expandex. This is a modified starch. It's been around for a while. It's made from tapioca flour. It is a non-GMO food, so it's not as scary as it sounds. Comes initially from cassava root, but this is a magical ingredient. And if you're going to make my future bread recipes, you're gonna need to get this. It's not crazy expensive. It's also on Amazon. I'm gonna link to all of this for you guys, by the way. You need this. Just trust me. Don't try to skip it and think these are gonna turn out, because they won't. You have to buy this. Okay, and then the third flour is potato starch, and that is extremely easy to find. Whole Foods, Target, like anywhere. Potato starch is very easy to find. Okay, so a next unique ingredient that you may not have heard about before is these vegan condensed milks. Now, you don't have to use one of these. I like to use it at the very end. A woman named Teresa told me about her family doing this, and they have a tradition of pouring condensed milk on top of and like all over their cinnamon rolls or regular cinnamon rolls before baking them. And so I was like, I gotta try this out. And so I found 2 kinds. I found a condensed coconut milk one, and that's the one I've been using. And then I found a oat milk one, and I've not tried this one yet, but these are both available at Whole Foods. Like I said, you don't have to use it at the end, but I highly recommend it. Like I can't emphasize enough how awesome these are, because when the cinnamon rolls are heating up in the oven, the sugar and the butter in the center of them kind of melt down and ooze through the bottom. And when that combines with this, it creates a thick, luscious, dairy-free vegan caramel that is to die for. So definitely do this if you can find them. Okay, let's talk about the fat in this recipe next. Can't really see in here, but this is just vegetable oil. Now, is vegetable oil a great clean ingredient? No, and you don't have to use it. I have just broken down and started buying this for my baking, because I go through such mass quantities and things get real expensive. So you could use avocado oil, you could use, honestly, melted coconut oil would probably fine. You could use melted ghee. Technically, you could even use olive oil, but I would stick with like a super mild flavor oil. And then for the filling, this is vegan butter. You don't have to use vegan butter. Again, you could use any oil of your choice, but I find that using this butter is really great, because it's just really easy to kind of spread in there, and it just works really well. You'll see when we get to that step. This is what I use for the inside of the cinnamon rolls. The key here is that it needs to be room temperature. It needs to be super soft. You don't want it melted, you don't want it hard, you want it spreadable. So that's your goal. So I like to set this out about an hour before I get started, or you could put it in the microwave for 15 seconds. Okay, the next thing I want to tell you about is the yeast. And this is one of those things that is not hard at all, I promise you, but it's one of those things I find people get really kind of tripped up over and a little confused. I always use quick rise yeast because with gluten-free baking, you don't need to do multiple rises. It's just simple. You're just doing one proof and that's it. So yeah, Red Star quick rise yeast, you can buy this in packets. You can buy it as a whole thing. I always just get a bigger one because I bake a lot. And it's honestly, it'll last you forever if you keep it in the fridge. It won't go like years. It never goes bad on me if I keep it in the fridge. And the next thing is our milk. And I have this pre-measured out. Today I am just using full fat unsweetened oat milk. And you can use any dairy-free milk of your preference for this recipe, coconut, almond, whatever. I chose the full fat oat milk because I find that that extra fat adds a little bit more tenderness. And you are gonna heat this up over the stove or in the microwave for, if you're in the microwave, 30 to 40 seconds. You just want it to be a warm, like lukewarm temperature. If it's a little hot, it's gonna kill your yeast. If it's a little cold, nothing's gonna happen. So just a nice lukewarm temperature, that's it. Don't stress over it, easy peasy. And yeah, I think that's it for all of our unique ingredients. And let's dive into this. Okay, so here is my stand mixer bowl. Normally, here's our flour blend. Normally, I would start this process by putting this bowl actually right on to the baking scale and measuring things out one by one and adding it. This is one of those cool recipes where everything doesn't have to go in a specific order. It's actually very, it's an easygoing recipe, if that makes sense. So this is my flour blend, that King Arthur mix, the expandex, and the potato starch. And here is my sugar. This is just organic cane sugar. Add that in, very important. I do not recommend trying to use a sugar-free sweetener here. This is meant to be an indulgent, delicious recipe. If you want sugar-free keto sweet rolls, I've got those too. So yes, let's see. Next thing that we need here is I've got my xanthan gum, oh, and by the way, you could use guar gum if you like that more, although I think there's xanthan in this mix, so. And then I've got my double acting baking powder. Definitely use double acting, it makes a big difference. And my Himalayan salt. You can use any kind of salts, but that's just what I always have on hand. All right, next thing, just gonna dump in the oil. And applesauce. We've got 6 ounces of applesauce. And I just use unsweetened, but honestly, you could use cinnamon applesauce, you could use whatever. And just to give you kind of an idea on quantity, these little guys are each 4 ounces. So about 1.5 of these is what you need for this recipe. Okay, and then I'm just going to attach this and mix. Start out low. Now, keep in mind that we're going to throw the yeast in here as well, so you don't need to mix all the way. I just like to kind of start the mixing process a little bit. This dough is still going to be pretty dry, so I like to just stop here and turn it off. What are the steps I actually forgot to tell you about? Before you even are mixing up your dough, preheat your oven to 200 degrees. I know that sounds like an odd temperature, but we are going to use your warm oven as the perfect area for this dough to rise, so that even if it is the dead of winter and your kitchen is freezing cold, or it's summer, whenever, you have guaranteed results here. So the other thing I like to do after I set the oven on is I like to do the yeast mixture to give it a couple of minutes to get going. I have made this so many times that I don't even need to do this ahead of time because I know exactly how it's going to turn out. I know this batch is alive and well, but you're going to take your warm milk and you're going to pour in your yeast and your sugar. I have them pre-measured out. And then you just use a little spoon, which I forgot to grab. We'll just use this. And you just give it a little mix. And the best spot for this is right on your warm oven as it's preheating. And within a couple of minutes, it's going to just start to kind of bubble and froth. And that's how you know your yeast is alive and well. But for the sake of just making this today, I am gonna go ahead and dump this in with the dough because I know it's gonna work. But all you wanna look for is little bubbles and a little puffiness on top and you're golden. Okay, so here we go. Pouring this in. Make sure to get all of that yeast and that sugar that I did not do a good job mixing up. Get it all in there. And then close this, lock it, start on low again. And then you just kind of gradually turn it up high, and this is making the whole table shake as well as the camera. So I'm not going to model it for you, but I'm going to show you what it's supposed to look like when it's done. So it's hard to see in there really well, but basically the dough is kind of forming in the center and it's just barely sticking a little bit to the edges, and that is perfect. And we don't want this to just be extremely well mixed. I like to do it on high just to make sure everything is perfectly incorporated, and then we're ready to roll it out. Okay, here's the part where things get real interesting and different than you probably are used to. This is where gluten-free dough is going to be different. We are going to start with some spray oil. You don't have to use this junky vegetable oil like I'm using. You can use avocado, whatever. You want to take this and you're going to heavily spray your surface. Like, don't be afraid. This is important. All right, and then I'm going to just plop this dough right on here. This is a very, very sticky, kind of wet, interesting dough to work with. But I promise you, this is exactly what we want. I'm gonna finish this up. All right, I got all my dough out of the bowl, and we're gonna do something which may seem odd, but we are gonna spray the dough with oil all over again, and a little bit on your hands too. And we're not gonna actually roll this out. We are just going to press it out into a nice rectangle. Now, you're actually probably gonna wanna get some measuring tape or a measuring stick for this part, because I like to make it exactly 16 inches wide. And this allows me to cut each roll into the perfect 2-inch sized little roll, so that they are perfect in the pan. All right, so I'm gonna keep working on this, just kind of like slapping it out, trying to get it even. And it doesn't need to look pretty because it's all gonna be covered up. As far as like thickness goes, I'd say maybe it's 1/4 of an inch. And I like to flatten it out to the point that there's about 1 inch on the top and 1 inch on the bottom of my parchment paper. All right, I'm gonna go get my measuring tape and double check the size. Okay, I don't know why I said measuring paper. Okay, so checking in here. Oh look, this is 16, very close. So I just kind of like push it in a little bit, kind of square it out. Now, it doesn't have to be exactly 16 inches because a lot of times I will just kind of tap the ends in after I roll it up. So it's okay, don't stress, doesn't need to be perfect. We're just trying to get it kind of close. All right, so that is all set. Now it is time for the butter. And I've got 5 tablespoons here. You can do 6 if you want. I really don't care. This is very flexible. And see how this is very just kind of wet and spread, not wet, soft and spreadable. And you're just gonna kind of spread it all over. Now I like to leave like 1/2 inch to 1 inch at the top, and same thing at the bottom, and just a little bit on the edges. But not completely on the edge. Like you don't want to go all the way to the edge, but you want to leave like 1/2 inch here because that's going to be a piece of a roll. So if you go too thin with it, then that's going to be a roll with barely anything in it, and that's kind of lame. Okay, now this does not have to be perfect. It's going to taste good no matter what. Good enough. Next we're going to do brown sugar. I have about 2 cups here. Again, this amount is quite flexible, but I find that 2 cups is a really good amount for the most part. This is a larger batch of cinnamon rolls than your standard rolls. We're not using a 7x7 or 8x8 square pan. We are actually going to be using a 13.5-inch cast iron skillet. And cast iron, I have found, is just the best possible option for gluten-free bread because it gets really nice and warm when you're proofing the dough, and it stays warm. So it really allows for the dough to rise as much as it possibly can. I love working with cast iron for bread now. So you can use various pans for this recipe, but I just highly, highly recommend that specific pan. Okay, and last but not least, we have our cinnamon. And I have a tablespoon here. You could do pumpkin pie spice, you could do cardamom, you could do really whatever your heart desires. All right, now it's time to roll it up. So this is the tricky part. Well, actually, I'm not even gonna say it's tricky. It's not. This is gonna work perfectly for you. It's gonna be easy. You're gonna wanna start with collecting a little bowl of potato starch. And we're gonna use this after we roll it up. I'll show you why. It helps kind of solidify the dough enough that it's easier to work with, so you get really beautiful rolls. So I'm just gonna put that over here. All right, so I start by doing my first little roll. Now, you're using this parchment paper as your guide. It's gonna keep you from running into any problems whatsoever. The first one, I like to kind of take a moment and kind of like tuck it in just a little bit. You don't have to do this, but it just kind of helps them end up a little bit tighter. And then you go like this. And I kind of just lift up the paper as I go, and I kind of like to go like this along the way to kind of make sure that it's nice and tight and it's staying together the way that I want it to. Again, see, kind of doing this. And go a little bit further again. Now, when we get to this last piece, I like to pause, and this is when I like to sprinkle a little starch here. And normally I would clean this up because this is going to make things just look a little bit messy if it gets on the dough. So just go like that quick. All right, so I've got my starch, and then I take the head piece here. Let me switch it back so you can see it. And I bring it up like this, and I kind of press it into place, and then I roll this over so that it is seam down. And then a little more starch on the top. So we've got starch on the bottom, and we've got starch on the top. And then I kind of like to go back again and just kind of make sure it's together really nicely. One of the little things you want to keep an eye out for when you're pressing out your dough is to not have it be too thick in the center. I find that I do that a little bit too often. If that happens and your centerpiece is a lot thicker than here, you kind of just press it together and push out. Okay. So then, like I was saying earlier, if you're wider than that 16 inches, which is probably going to happen a little bit when you're rolling it up, I just take my hands at the ends and I just kind of like tap it in. And I'm going to go like this. You go around until you end up with a perfect log of dough. It's flawless. It's all the same width for the most part. And yeah, if there's any ends that are little pieces that are like a little wet and sticky, again, just kind of, and if you are nervous, you can come back under, add a little bit more, because this is just gonna make it really easy when you take your dough apart. When you cut your dough up. Okay, next step. All right, now we're gonna get our measuring tape back out. And actually I need to move this down a little bit because I got stuff over here. And we're going to lay that out. This actually got quite a bit bigger than 16 inches. Not the end of the world, just kind of pushing it back together. There we go. And then you're just gonna take a knife, and you're not cutting through all the way. We're just marking to know where we're going to cut. So every 2 inches, just do a little mark. So 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14. There we go. Okay. And we're done with the measuring tape. Now, you never, ever, ever cut cinnamon rolls with a knife. You're going to want to use a strong twine, not a fuzzy twine, or you're going to want to use dental floss. That's the go-to. I didn't have any of that, so I was like, let me just try this on a whim, and I was surprised to find it worked perfectly fine. So we're gonna take this, and I like to move it down so you can see. I kind of like to lift up the end just a little bit, and I slide it under. You don't want to kind of just like drag it under, because if you do this, it might actually cut the bottom of the dough and make things a little funky. So you're going to go up to your first line, crisscross, and pull. And then look at that, it's perfect. So I'm going to move this over to my prepared cast iron skillet. I will show you that in just one moment. All right, repeat the process. Lift up the end just a little bit and pull. And again, another perfect roll. And just keep going. You should end up with 9 buns that are about the exact same size. Now, some might be a little thicker if the center of your dough was a little bit thicker, but that's okay. Keep it going. I'll show you one more. Slide it under, and boom. Okay, so in my distraction of filming, I measured out 8 rolls, and I normally do 9. I'm not sure what happened there, but that is okay. We're just gonna go with the flow. So as you can see, I have these spread out because they are going to get very big. And I usually like to do like 5 or 6 on the outside, about an inch or so apart, and then 2 in the center. Cut the last one. Okay. I'm kind of put one here. And you can move things around once they're not, you know, they're not super fragile. Like, yeah, I see. This one is massive. I definitely mismeasured a little bit. That's okay. So I kind of like to push them down just a little bit, make them a little wider, because they're pretty tall. Now, one of the benefits of using this big pan is the height. And once I add the condensed cream and stuff in here, you know, I'm gonna go like this. I'll move this one over a little here, kind of like this. Once I get the condensed cream in here and these bake, the liquids are gonna really kind of come up like halfway. So if you use a pan that is too shallow, you're in trouble. It's going to overflow and burn everywhere. I did that the first 2 times that I made these. So whatever pan you use, it needs to be like a good 3 to 4 inches tall, because these are big buns. Now, another option too is to cut your buns to be more like 1.5 inches tall, thick, instead of 2. And if you do that, you're gonna end up more with like 11 to 12. And you could use a bigger pan. They're just not going to be quite as massive, but there are different options. You can follow my guide for how I cut them. You can do it however you want. Just keep in mind that these are going to double to triple in size. So they're going to get very big. Okay, so I have my cinnamon rolls in the 13.5 inch cast iron pan skillet. I greased the bottom with a little bit of oil on the sides, and now this step is so important. So I was mentioning before, I really like using condensed coconut milk or oat milk, or you could use regular condensed milk if you're not dairy free, sweetened condensed milk. If you're not going to use that, it is really, really important that you use a fatty milk, or you use a cream or melted coconut cream, something of that sort, to brush all over these, because when it comes to gluten-free baking, the more moist and wet your dough is, the more it's going to rise. So this is essential. Do not skip this step. And if you're just using like regular milk or full fat oat milk, you may want to brush them once while they're rising and then again before they bake. So I have about the can of the condensed coconut milk was 7.4 ounces, and that is the perfect amount for this batch. The oat milk ones I noticed are a little bit bigger. This one has 11.25 ounces, so you really only need to use like half or 2/3 of this can. You don't need to use the whole thing. I'm a little concerned if you use the whole thing that it could overflow, because you'll see when these are done, yeah, everything's gonna come up to like here. So this came out of the can really, really thick, too thick to drizzle. So I popped it in the microwave for 20 seconds, 30 seconds, and gave it a good stir. So now all I'm doing is I am just going to drizzle this all over them. And it's gonna kind of like seep in and just kind of do magical things. And I'm also going to get it all over the bottom of the pan. I'm gonna get it on the sides of like, you just wanna get it everywhere. And they're gonna just kind of like soak them up while they explode, and it's gonna really help them get massive. It's the best trick. Thank you so much, Teresa, for the idea. Okay, so now I'm going to kind of make sure, now you can use a little brush if you want. That would probably be a little easier than what I'm doing, because I just kind of cut this dough. But you want to make sure that it's like really kind of on the sides of your cinnamon rolls too, not just the top. Because like I said, if the dough is moist throughout, it's going to rise and poof up the absolute best that it possibly can. So yeah, this whole pan is just going in here. You just want to get it everywhere. Okay, these are ready to proof. So your oven should have been on at 200 degrees. And at this point, you're going to want to turn that off and cover this up. Just you're going to take any towel, you're going to cover this up, and you're going to put it into your warm oven that is turned off. And it's gonna feel hot, but it's perfect. You're gonna slide this in, and you're gonna leave the door open a crack for the first 10 minutes. But you wanna leave this pan in the oven for 30 minutes total. And then after that point, you're gonna put it on top of the stove, and we're gonna preheat the oven to 375. But I'm gonna show you what these look like after they've had time to warm up and get big and puffy, and you're gonna see how much they change. So while those are in the oven, proofing at that 200 degrees, I wanted to show you how to make a really quick glaze that you can go on top. The glaze is completely optional, of course. These are very sweet, indulgent cinnamon rolls, but I don't know, I just think the glaze just adds that little something something. Now, making glaze is so easy. All you need is like 2 cups of powdered sugar, and to this you can add water, milk, orange juice, like whatever you want, and just a tablespoon at a time. To make things a little extra indulgent today, I'm going to do a little bourbon. So I'm going to show you how to go about that. Okay, so there really is no recipe for this. I mean, if you really want one, you can go get one. But you're just adding a little bit at a time. Don't mind my dog whimpering in the background. He wants me to help him climb the stairs. Now I find actually that you need a little bit more alcohol for the ratio than you would if you were using water or milk, which does not make me mad at all, because that little extra bit of bourbon to the flavor is just awesome. So you just keep adding it until you reach the consistency that you personally like. If it gets a little bit too thin for your preference, no problem, add a little bit more powdered sugar. If you want it thinner, add more liquid. This is gonna be some strong glaze, and I am not mad about it. Go a little bit further. I just want to get all those little clumps out. I'm gonna keep mixing, but this looks good to me. It's a good drizzling texture. And I'm gonna just set this aside until my cinnamon rolls are totally done, and then I'm gonna just drizzle it on top at the end. All right, these have been proofing for about 40 minutes, and look at them now. They got quite a bit bigger, and believe it or not, they are basically gonna completely fill this pan after they bake. So I just preheated my oven to 375, and I'm gonna stick these in for around 20-25 minutes, and I will show you what they look like when they come out. And there they are. They're massive. I can tell I actually overproofed the dough just a little bit because you can see they're a little like dimply. The surface is not totally smooth, but that's okay. They're gonna taste exactly the same. It just visually makes them look a little bit less perfect. Okay, so at this point, and you can see there's like bubbling caramel all the way around from that condensed milk. At this point, I just like to take the glaze. Oh, it smells, these just smell so good. I wish you could be in my house right now, especially with this bourbon hitting the hot buns. Ah, heaven. Like I said, this glaze is totally optional. It just adds a little extra something. Some of them actually exploded open. So good. And that's literally all there is to it. One little tip, when you are cleaning the pan, some of the sugar is gonna get really hard and it's going to stick to the pan. Just run it under super, super hot water and it'll come right off. Easy peasy. There's so much you could do with this recipe. I'm probably going to be experimenting to create more flavors, like for example, sticky buns. To make sticky buns, you just layer the bottom of the pan with pecans, chopped pecans, and you flip them upside down. So there will be some of those. If you wanted to experiment with putting apple cider in the dough instead of using the milk, you could do that. You could also chop up and cook apples like really little and spice them up with brown sugar, and you could put that inside of your filling. I'm going to be playing around with making a pumpkin variation by subbing out some of the applesauce and some of the milk for pumpkin puree. So stay tuned. There is a lot coming. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask them in the comments. I'm here to help. I've made these so many times now that I probably can answer pretty much any question except for how do I change this recipe and use different flours. I will not be answering that one because this recipe is a work of art and it's perfect as is. And I spent so long and so many hours getting it just right that I will not be telling you how to make it any other way. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.